Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into advanced English conversations.
Sounds exciting.
We're going to be looking at an episode called Mastering Advanced English Conversations,
Yeah.
Navigating Complex Ideas.
Okay.
And it's from a podcast called The Fluent Path. And hopefully, by the end of this deep dive, we can all walk away with some really practical tips
Yeah.
to become more confident, engaging conversationalists. So to kick things off, what if we imagine we're in a conversation
Okay.
about a really complex topic? Let's say something like the environmental impact of industrial farming.
Yeah.
How do you even approach something like that?
Yeah, that's a big topic. I think the first thing I would say is break it down. Break it down into smaller pieces, Think of it like building a house.
Ooh, I like that.
You wouldn't try and construct the whole house at once, right?
Right.
Start with the foundation, then you do the walls, then the roof.
That's a really good analogy.
Right.
So in this case, what would be the foundation?
Well, like for industrial farming, you'd want to think about things like what's the impact on the environment?
Yeah.
Food production, ethical considerations.
Those are all good starting points.
Yeah, and by focusing on just one area at a time, you can avoid overwhelming yourself or whoever you're talking to with too much information all at once.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like creating stepping stones through a complex landscape.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not just about breaking it down, right?
No.
How you express yourself within those smaller chunks matters too.
Yeah, absolutely. The podcast really emphasized using precise language instead of vague generalizations. It's easy to fall into the trap of saying, climate change is a problem.
Right.
But that's not really telling us anything specific.
So what would be a more precise way of expressing that?
Well, instead of just saying climate change is a problem, you could say something like, the accelerating pace of climate change is driven primarily by the increase in carbon emissions from fossil fuels. But deforestation and industrial agriculture are also significant contributing factors.
Wow, that paints a much clearer picture.
Right.
But using all that specific language might be a bit intimidating for someone who's still building their confidence.
Yeah, sure.
So what advice does the podcast offer for them?
Well, this is where examples are so powerful.
Okay.
They really help to ground those abstract concepts and make them much more relatable, accessible.
That reminds me of a conversation I had recently about inflation. It was kind of hard to explain, but then I used the example of how much a cup of coffee costs now.
Oh, right.
Compared to 10 years ago.
Right.
And it instantly clicked.
Exactly. Providing a tangible reference point can make all the difference. And in the podcast, they use this really great example to illustrate this point.
Okay.
They talk about deforestation.
All right.
And they use the example of Brazil.
Yes. Specifically the Amazon rainforest.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Mentioning a specific location, facing a real problem,
Yeah.
suddenly makes it so much more concrete.
Right. It's not just a theoretical concept anymore.
Yeah.
It's a place you can picture in your mind.
Exactly.
I think it also adds an emotional element to the conversation, right? Hearing about the Amazon rainforest being destroyed feels a lot more impactful.
Yeah, for sure.
Than just talking about deforestation in general.
Absolutely. But remember, while examples are great, you don't want to bombard your listener with too much technical stuff or statistics.
Right. It's all about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Choosing examples strategically.
Exactly.
So speaking of engaging the listener, how can we make sure we're not just talking at people, but actually having a conversation?
Well, this is where active listening comes in.
Okay. How would you define that?
So active listening is crucial for gauging how much your conversation partner knows.
Okay.
And then adjusting your language accordingly.
Oh, that's interesting.
You really need to pay attention to both their verbal and nonverbal cues. Right. To see if they're actually following along or if they seem confused.
It's almost like reading the room, but in a one-on-one conversation.
Yes.
Constantly observing and adapting to make sure you're both on the same page.
Yeah. And if you sense they're struggling, you can slow down.
Okay.
Clarify or even offer a simpler analogy.
But it's important to do it in a way that doesn't feel condescending.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So we've covered breaking down complexity.
Yeah.
Using precise language, the power of examples, and active listening. It feels like we're building a really solid foundation here. What else can help us create a smooth and engaging flow in our conversations?
I think structure is really important too. Just like a good essay needs smooth transitions between paragraphs.
Okay.
A good conversation needs them between ideas.
Oh, you mean those verbal bridges
Yes.
that connect different points. I've always admired people who can seamlessly weave together different ideas.
Yeah, and the podcast talked about using what they call transition phrases
Okay.
to signal shifts in topic or expansions on ideas.
Oh, that's so helpful.
Yeah.
What are some examples of these transition phrases?
They gave some really good ones like, that brings us to another important aspect of this issue.
Okay.
Or, in light of what we just discussed.
I like those. They're subtle but effective.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how they would help to avoid those awkward conversational lulls. But what happens when you're discussing a topic with conflicting viewpoints?
Oh, that's a good point. That can get tricky. This is where acknowledging and engaging with diverse perspectives becomes really important.
Right, because I've been in conversations where people just talk over each other, just trying to dominate the discussion with their own viewpoint.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
It's not productive.
And the podcast had some good suggestions for navigating these kinds of situations.
Okay, so how do they suggest we handle those conversations?
So first, it's important to acknowledge the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it. The podcast suggests using phrases like, I understand your point about, or that's an interesting perspective and here's how I see it.
It shows that you're actually listening, right?
Exactly.
Not just waiting for your turn to speak.
And remember, you don't have to agree to acknowledge their perspective.
It's okay to have a different opinion.
Exactly. And they also gave some phrases for respectfully presenting your own viewpoint.
I'm all ears. How can we disagree without being disagreeable?
They suggest things like, while I see your point, I would argue.
Okay.
Or, that's one way to look at it, but there are other factors to consider.
I see. So it's about finding that balance again.
Yes.
Acknowledging their view while still confidently expressing your own. Yeah. Wow, we've covered so much ground already. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Me too.
What other gems await us in this treasure chest of a podcast episode?
Well, next they talked about expressing nuance.
Oh, okay.
Which is so important in these kinds of conversations. Things aren't always black and white, right?
You mean going beyond simple yes or no responses?
Exactly. And they used a really interesting example talking about artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Instead of just saying, I believe AI is dangerous.
Yeah.
You could say, while I believe AI has immense potential, there are several ethical concerns that need to be addressed in its development.
Oh, that's a much more thoughtful response.
Yeah, it shows you're not just blindly accepting or rejecting the technology.
You're engaging with it on a deeper level. And that can lead to much more interesting conversations.
Absolutely. Speaking of engaging on a deeper level,
the
podcast also talked about the importance of asking insightful questions.
Oh, I love that. It's
Okay.
not just about expressing yourself eloquently. It's about drawing out other people's thoughts and perspective.
Exactly.
Instead of talking at them, you're inviting them to share their own insights.
And they contrasted a basic question.
Yeah.
Like, do you think AI is dangerous?
With a more insightful one, like, what are your thoughts on the ethical implications of AI in healthcare?
Oh, wow. That second question is so much more thought-provoking.
Right.
It's not just asking for a yes or no.
It invites a much more nuanced and thoughtful response.
Exactly. It's like opening a door to a whole new level of conversation.
Asking thoughtful questions shows your own intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
But it also encourages the other person to really think critically.
Okay, so we've talked about expressing nuance.
Yeah.
Asking insightful questions. Is there anything else we should highlight from this podcast episode?
Well, they went back to a point we mentioned earlier, active listening.
Ah, right. It's easy to get caught up in our own thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
But true communication requires us to be just as skilled at listening.
Exactly. Active listening means truly absorbing what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
Reflecting on it and then responding thoughtfully.
It's about being present in the conversation.
Treating it as a genuine exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
You're not just waiting for your turn to speak. You're actively participating in a shared journey of discovery. This is all such valuable advice. I feel like we've been given a roadmap to navigate the complex world of advanced English conversations. But I think we need a little break to let all this amazing information sink in.
Yeah. Let's take a pause. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot more to explore. We'll be back soon with part 2, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. We're delving deeper into mastering advanced English conversation. Unpacking more strategies for taking your communication skills to a whole new level.
I'm so excited. This podcast has been a goldmine of practical advice. I'm really getting a sense of how to move beyond basic fluency and really engage with ideas in a much deeper way. So what other gems did they share?
Well, One thing that caught my attention was the power of pausing.
Oh, interesting.
It's such a simple thing,
Right.
but it can really make a difference. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when they're nervous, tend to rush through their sentences.
It's a natural instinct. But the podcast hosts pointed out that those pauses
Yeah.
give your listener time to actually process what you're saying. And it also creates this sense of anticipation
Oh, interesting.
for what you're going to say next.
It's like those dramatic pauses in a movie.
Exactly.
Keep you on the edge of your seat.
It adds weight to your words.
Yeah.
It makes you sound more confident.
Love it. Simple but effective. Okay, so we've got pausing down. What else?
Let's see. They also talk about paraphrasing, which is super helpful,
Oh, that's a good one.
especially in those, more complex conversations.
Yeah, it's about making sure you really understand what the other person is saying, right?
Absolutely. It shows you're actively listening,
Like,
not just waiting for your turn to speak. It also helps to clarify things.
yeah.
Avoid those misunderstandings that can happen sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes we think we know what someone means, but we haven't really checked.
Exactly. And they suggested using phrases like, so if I understand you correctly,
No.
are you saying that? Just simple things like that.
Yeah, those are great. I'm definitely going to try to use those more often. What else do they cover?
Well, they emphasize being adaptable in your communication style,
Okay.
which basically means adjusting your language and your tone
Okay.
based on, who you're talking to.
That's interesting. So you wouldn't speak to your boss the same way you would talk to your best friend.
Exactly.
And you probably wouldn't use a lot of technical jargon
Right.
if you were talking to someone who doesn't know much about that topic.
They called this code switching. It's being able to shift between different styles of communication,
Oh, I like that.
depending on the situation.
It's like having a toolbox full of different communication tools and knowing which one to use
Yeah,
for the right job.
that's a great way to put it. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about pausing, paraphrasing, and code switching. Anything else we should highlight?
Yes. This is something we've touched on before,
Okay.
but it's worth repeating. Body language.
Ah, yes. Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. Eye contact, gestures,
Yeah.
posture, all of that plays a huge role
Right.
in how your message is received.
Like the icing on the cake. You can have brilliant ideas, articulate them perfectly.
Right.
But if your body language is saying something different,
Yeah.
people might not get the full message.
Exactly. So it's important to be mindful of your nonverbal cues. Make sure they're aligned with your words.
Okay. So it's not just what you say, but how you say it,
Oh.
both verbally and non-verbally.
Right. Communication is multifaceted.
Yeah, this has been so insightful. I feel like I'm seeing communication in a whole new light.
Me too. And these tips are helpful for anyone, not just English learners.
That's a good point. Good communication is a universal skill.
Uh.
Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot in this episode. Are we ready to wrap things up?
Almost. There's one final thought from the podcast I think is worth sharing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it? So what was that final thought? What else can we learn about mastering advanced English conversations?
They talked about exploring cultural nuances of communication.
Interesting. So even when you've mastered the language itself,
Yeah.
there can be these subtle differences
Right.
in how people communicate.
Absolutely. What might be considered polite in one culture
Yeah,
could be seen as rude in another.
right. Things like directness, humor, even certain idioms
Yeah. All of that.
can vary so much.
It's fascinating, isn't it? You could say the exact same thing in
Yeah.
two different cultures and get
Mhm.
completely different reactions.
It really highlights how communication is about so much more
Yeah,
than just the words themselves. It's about that cultural context, too.
exactly. And being aware of those nuances
Yeah.
can help you avoid misunderstandings.
It's like that saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do,
Yeah.
but applied to communication.
You got to be adaptable, adjust your style
Yeah.
based on the cultural norms.
It's all about being sensitive, I guess, to how other people might interpret what you say and do.
Absolutely. And the best way to learn these nuances
Oh.
is just through observation,
Okay.
interaction,
Right.
a willingness to learn from others.
So it sounds like mastering advanced English conversations
Yeah.
isn't just about fluency.
No.
It's also about developing this cultural intelligence.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about language learning.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond just memorizing words and grammar rules.
It's a journey of growth and discovery. This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've learned so much
Yeah.
from breaking down complex ideas
Uh-huh.
to the power of pausing and paraphrasing
Right.
to the importance of body language.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Even cultural sensitivity. It's like we've unlocked this whole toolkit for better communication.
And the key is to actually use these tools, right?
Put them into practice.
The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
So don't be afraid to challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Step outside your comfort zone.
Have those conversations.
Embrace those different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Keep learning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep talking. That's a wrap on this deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we did. Until next time, happy conversing.